Good evening, guys. Just popping in quickly whilst I've got a few minutes to answer the third of the questions that came in last week for question of the week. As I've mentioned, I'm going to answer all of them that came in. This one's from Jill. I've got one from Jill to come down the list. Jill, Stacey, Christine. If you have any other questions for me, that will take me to Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So I need one for Thursday and one for Friday. Hi, Roz. So I'm happy to answer any questions that come in this week. I'm launching my She Finds Freedom program next Monday. You've got 7 days from now until Monday to sign up. It's going to be a fantastic course. Some of the women who've already joined have come into my circle community, so they have got group coaching this week, and all sorts of goodness in the circle. So this question from Jill was, how can I stop catastrophizing? Everything for me is worst case scenario. Example, I text my adult daughter and don't hear from her in a few minutes, and I automatically start thinking of all the horrible things that could have happened to her. It's stressful and exhausting. Right. So, Jill, thank you for the question. I hear you. This was something that I used to experience because of the grief and loss that I'd gone through in my life. I would definitely catastrophize if I didn't hear from someone and they were traveling home. Hi, Holly. So yeah, I just want you to know that I really understand what you're saying, and how can you stop doing that? So it's understanding, Jill, about how we create our experience from the inside out, and how we can habitually replay certain scenarios in our head. Your brain is a machine. Your brain is wired as a machine for your survival. And as a result, what the brain likes is for things to be the same, for things to be habitual, for things to be on repeat, and for things to sort of stay the same, essentially, because the brain wants you to survive. And the way it does that is by putting everything on automatic pilot, so that it thinks that it will stay the same. And that includes thoughts, certain flavours of thoughts. So we'll each of us have our own unique way of seeing the world. And like, I've got certain Charli flavours of how I would have seen the world, particularly before coming across this understanding and all the work that I've done on myself to heal myself. I would have been petrified if someone was travelling home in case they had an accident. I was always having flashbacks of the accident. I would start to create forward flashbacks, if you like, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Of someone potentially having an accident. So my experience, Jill, was one of trauma. And so then my particular flavour of movie that played out was one of fear and one of loss. Okay, and I want you to just try and grasp that, like, we're all individual, we're all using the principles, and we're all working from the inside out. And we have an experience of life that, again, we've experienced from the inside out that's unique for us. And so we'll have our own particular flavour of that. So the reason the how do I question will be, Jill, about understanding that you have a particular flavour which is about catastrophizing. So if you don't hear from your daughter, your brain, so your worst fear, the worst case scenario, this is what a brain wants to come up with, because we have a negativity bias. It's fascinating because, again, this comes from the brain wanting us to survive, so it remembers all the bad things. Now, it might be that you've experienced loss or bad things happening to you in your life, Jill, which means you are frightened of bad things happening, which means your brain is creating a movie about those bad things happening, particularly if someone doesn't respond to you. And the reason I really get this is because when my brother died, after my brother died, for those of you who don't know, he and my dad were in the same accident. My brother was killed and my father was severely disabled, and I was 21. Now, after that, how I dealt with my world was to try and control everything and everyone. And that's how my anxiety got exacerbated, because I was trying to control everyone's life. Now, I need to know when you're coming home, and I need you to tell me you love me, and I need you to do this, I need you to do that, and I need you to do that, and then I'll be okay. So the boyfriend that I had at the time, bless him, he just was a young man, and he wasn't telling me he loved me. And I would lie there looking at him, like desperately looking, like, why isn't he telling me he loves me? And this whole kind of huge snowball, basically, from a tiny thought which I believed, which is, I need him to tell me he loves me and then I'll be okay, grew into this huge thing, and he had no idea. And part of my control was like, he needs to tell me where he's going, he needs to contact me, he needs to do all these things. And what happened with my father, who was now severely disabled, was then he bought me a phone, and then he would be demanding that I respond, because in his mind, he's lost his son, he's disabled, he needs to know that I'm on hand. So for me, creating what I understand about this now, and I really saw this when I started to learn about the principles, which of course I'm going to teach about next week in my freedom program more deeply. But when my son got his car, his first car, he went off for the day, and then he said he'd be back at a certain time. Now that time came and went, and he didn't come back. What happened to me, and this was really clear for me, I started to go in. Now, I already understood this. I'd already seen through my post-traumatic stress disorder, my flashbacks. I realised that they were just a movie created in my mind. But what I then saw was that I had a future movie play out where my son was hurt, and that the same thing would happen, where he'd been killed and the police would come to my door. So this is worst case scenario, right, Jill? And this is what we're talking about here. So I suddenly realised, my son would walk through the door, and I suddenly realised I've been playing out a movie, like I'm in a trance. You may have seen people where they're just like in a trance. They're in their thinking mind. I realised that in that moment I had been in a trance, in a movie that felt real and was real. Oh, you're watching, Jill. Oh, this is amazing. This is so good that you're watching this. Thank you for commenting. I realised in that moment, I was like, oh my God, I've just literally played out this movie and believed it in this moment. But it was all my imagination, which is thought, which is the gift of thought, my imagination. Now, I experienced it as if it was real. My heart was racing because I've experienced that in the past, because I've had the phone call to tell me that you know, my loved ones are dead. I've experienced that. So my brain can only go on the past. It can predict the future from our worst case scenario, from our brain. And all our brain's trying to do, very interestingly, is to protect us from this hideous reality that hasn't happened, because it's our fear. And you'll have seen fear, you know, false evidence appearing real. And that moment when I realised, when Sat walked through the door and he was fine, he had no idea what I'd been going through, that I suddenly realised that was literally false evidence appearing real. But as I was saying, Jill, earlier, it's from our particular flavour. There will be a reason why you're playing out worst case scenarios, and that lovely lady will be, you know, I don't know you, and I don't want to ever guess or you know, make light of things which are traumatic and difficult for people, and I deeply understand that. I had to do a lot of work around that for myself, about seeing how this movie was so real in my life, but it was because I'd had this experience which of course was very real and traumatic. So the how to, Jill, will be seeing that firstly you have a brain that wants to create the illusion of safety and control. You know, if you know where your daughter is, then you'll be okay. And you know, there's that aspect of it. There'll be a certain sort of flavour that you have for yourself, which will be based on your experience of life and how safe you feel in any moment. And you've got the principles, and so the principles are pointing to thought is what's doing the creating. What often gets missed, and what I speak a lot about, is this sort of unconscious thing, this unconscious drivers, this sort of flavour that you have, that you in particular have. And once you see that, and it takes some work, you know, Jill, if I don't know if you've done any programs on the principles before, but if you haven't and you come into my program on Monday, then that would be amazing. If you have, come into my circle, because this is the sort of thing that we look at and pull apart a little bit. Let me just see what Gab has put. Yeah, it sort of does, Gab. I've done CBT in the past, and I've taught CBT in the past, and I think it can work for people, but you know, I've got huge experience in the field of psychology. I've, you know, been trained in CBT, psychotherapy, loads of different modalities, and subsequently in latter years through principles and energetic principles. CBT keeps it in your mind, and what we're pointing to here is what's doing the creating, as opposed to getting caught up in the content. CBT gets caught up in the content and lets, you know, like reframe and stuff. What we're doing is, I'm just putting my glasses on. I think, yeah, CBT, Gab, will look at potentially reframing and changing the story. But what I'm pointing to here is what's underneath that and what's doing the creating. So the story that I was talking about, where my son had gone off in his car, and I created a movie, right, based on my experience of life, which was trauma and tragedy, okay? And what, if I were doing CBT on that, I'd take, you know, I don't even know if I'd be aware enough in those moments to do CBT on it, because it would be about taking the thoughts and writing them down and sort of analysing them. What it took was for me to have an insight into how I'm creating that experience, and then it moves because I take it less seriously, because I know underneath all of that I'm perfectly well, and I have this amazing capacity to scare the shit out of myself. Jill. Oh, cool. That sounds cool. Yeah, so like, you know, I genuinely would encourage you to, if you're even interested in, if you're being called to do my freedom program, then that's my foundational program, and I talk a lot about all of this stuff, why we catastrophize, why we have anxiety, why we have PTSD, like, and what's universal, you know, what's impermanent, what's true. What's true is always going to be what's constant, and what's not true is what's impermanent. And what's impermanent is thoughts, is feelings, is psychology. What's true and permanent is the fact that you think, is the fact that you have a soul that has been with you from birth until now, that part of you that has that awareness from now and, you know, and all the way back. That's what's true. my body's not true because my body has changed from birth until now, right? This isn't the truth. I change on a cellular level day by day by day. What's often hard for people to get their head around is, you know, when my thoughts are constant and repetitive, then of course they feel true. If I've been scaring myself for many years, and you're dealing with neurologically strong pathways in the brain that feel very real to people. And part of my freedom program, well, that's great, Jill, because part of my freedom program, I talk about neuroplasticity. The brain is plastic. You know, we can learn new things, which is how I've gotten to where I am. If any of you have watched a video of me being coached back in 2018, you'll see the difference in me. You'll feel the difference in me. And I just was hopeless, and I thought I was broken, in catastrophizing left, right and centre. I can't remember, I've lost my train of thought now, but anyway, you get the idea. I'm really pleased that you're here, Jill, and I could answer that for you. I will answer Stacey's tomorrow, and then Christine's the following day, and then if I get any more questions for Thursday and Friday, I'll be very, very happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. What a lovely to have all the interactions with you all. And if you are interested, Jill, just send me a message, or I'll put the link to sign up. You're so welcome. Thank you for asking it. I'm deeply touched that you're all in my group and you trust me enough to ask the questions. So I love doing this. I just answered a really wonderful question in my circle community about trauma and the principles, and yeah, I love doing this. So do you know, my dad bought me the record You've Got More Rabbit Than Sainsbury's. I don't know if you'd have heard of that. Chas and Dove. I like a good rabbit. Anyway, take care, ladies, and I'll talk to you very soon.